All right, welcome. This is the chapter on jazz effects. I'd like to demonstrate how to perform each of these effects and how I would teach them. So the first one is the fall. The fall is when we have a squiggly line off. You can see these symbols in the book. So I'm falling off of an A. So why doesn't it sound like this? You're not hearing all those individual notes. They're kind of smearing together. What does that? Well, remember this exercise? So on. Well, when I fall off of something, I'm going to fall a long ways in my oral cavity. And this will happen fairly quickly, but I'm going to fall a long ways before my fingers get involved. Slow motion. Then I keep blowing in that low position while my fingers go down quickly. And the fingers need to go in the path of least resistance. I'm not doing anything, I'm not playing C to B ever, F sharp to F natural ever. I'm taking the path of least, probably the path of least resistance is probably the D minor melodic scale, you know, the D major scale with an F natural. I don't have to do anything tricky. I'm going to use those notes. So the fingers are going as easiest path, smoothest path possible, but I am blowing below so that it smears things. Also, a good fall is a diminuendo, so I'm going to be tapering so that you really never hear the end of it. You're not going to hear an end note. So we got to be able to do a good fall. And that's how I would approach it. The next thing is the doit. This is like an upside down fall. Where, again, my fingers are not being heard. I'm going... Again, I'm taking the path of least resistance. But you're not really hearing that because I'm smearing it by blowing low. Plus, it's also a diminuendo so that we don't hear where the top of it is. So that's the doit. A bend can be done more than one way. That was done just with my mouth. That was done with my fingers and my mouth. I'm putting my F sharp down. I'm playing a G. I'm putting F sharp down, but I'm not putting the pad down quite tight. I don't want it to sound like a grace note. No. I'm putting it down almost all the way and then bringing it up so that it helps to smear. I have to combine that, of course, with what I'm doing with my mouth. Usually those bends are done as a combination between fingers and mouth. Sometimes the fingers aren't convenient, it's right over the break. Sometimes it doesn't really work to use the fingers very well because you don't want it to sound like a grace note or a clean note. Let's look at what I call bois. These are the notes that are a dotted quarter on an upbeat. So I've got a rest on the downbeat, dotted quarter on the upbeat. Instead of hitting it dead on, it's going to be bois, bois. Maybe it's more accurate to call it Duwa, to be consistent with myself on the other articulations, but so I'm going to go. And that happens because I'm hitting it pretty hard, number one. Number two, my jaw starts back a little bit and then thrusts forward. A lot more personality than I'm going to go. So sometimes I'll use my fingers a little bit for that too. I'm not using very much finger. It's mostly just starting with the jaw back a little bit and then it thrusts forward quickly and we arrive at pitch immediately. That's the bois. All right, the dip. This is when I'm going from one note to the same note and I need a little pitch difference in between. It's usually written as a little U. So I'm starting on pitch, going below pitch, coming back to pitch, going down. I'm doing this all with my mouth. Jaws going back and maybe slightly looser. A little bit looser and kind of back. Hopefully you can see that from the side. All right, what I'm calling the blue note bend. Whenever we play blue notes, we want to bend them. We don't want to play them clean. So if I got this figure, it's devoid of the soul that it should have. I'm going to bend that blue note. Usually the flat 3 or the flat 5 are blue notes. In this case, it's a flat 5. And they need to be bent because they aren't, in African music, they're not real pitches that can be equated. Well, they're real pitches, but they can't be equated to what we call real pitches in Western music. They kind of lie in between. And so we kind of obscure where the real note is by doing that bend, and it kind of approximates more what the blue note really was in African music. Okay, the gliss. With the gliss, these are usually fingered. And if it's not too wide, I'm going to use a full chromatic scale. All the chromatic notes are in there. They usually imply a little crescendo with them. So they'll be fingered chromatically in the gliss. Now, if they're wide, let's say it's... I really don't have time to finger every chromatic note in there. It's too wide. I usually start chromatically. So I'll just start chromatically and then I'll play chromatically at the top. In between, path of least resistance. Now it sounds like I played all the notes chromatically in there, but it's only because I'm playing the first couple of 3 notes chromatic and then the last 3 or 4 notes chromatic. Then the ones in between have got to be quicker than that. They're more diatonic, but they're not anything hard for the fingers. They're the path of least resistance for the fingers, which, again, the easiest scale on the saxophone is the D minor melodic ascending version. Has 1 sharp, C sharp. That is the easiest scale on the saxophone. That's what I would use in most cases. The fact that the piece is in a different key is immaterial. We don't have to match the key with what we're doing with these glisses or any of the effects. Okay, the Duwa notes. Now the Duwa, I have divided it into 3 different kinds of Duwas. The classic Duwa is when you have the do is lower and the wa is higher. So this is the example I put in the book. So the do is a soft note. It's muted, and the wah is a loud note. It really is simulating what the brass do with their hand in the bell. Boo-bop, 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 boo-bop. Of course, that does nothing on the saxophone. We have to do it with our mouth. I'm going to pull my jaw back for the do, which will muffle the note. I'm blowing just as hard the whole time. But when I pull my jaw back, it muffles the note. Thrust it forward. I'm blowing just the same the whole time. So when I thrust it forward, it suddenly comes back to full power. And I'm pointing out there that I would normally do a tongue cut off before that fall on the beat. Makes it really clean. Second category of do-wah, now my do is higher than my wah. My do needs a punch. It may be the top note of the contour. It needs a punch, but the wah also needs a punch. So if I'm going to do that, I actually have to punch both notes. Both notes are open. By the way, I use the brass notation for this too. A plus sign means my hand's in the bell, and the O means I'm open. And I'm going to use that shorthand syllable or that shorthand symbol for, I'm going to use that shorthand symbol for my Duwas. But so here I got to push hard. I got to push hard. And then I want to push hard on the second note, so I have to do a little decay in between. I am going to slur it. By the way, Duwas are slurs. Duwa, the wah, you won't really get the wah effect like you want to if you tongue it. It is a slurred effect. Duwa, dot, dot. The third category of Duwa is when I'm going from one pitch to the next pitch. It's the same pitch. In this case, I probably will do a little pitch thing. It's like the dip. For it to swing, though, I wait. Not. Because as soon as I start the dip, I've already set in concrete where the upbeat note is going to fall. It's going to be too soon. It won't swing. So I delay the dip so that I've got a later upbeat. Therefore, I can swing. I should mention. I started out to say this, but I didn't get it all in there. That a doo-wah is a dynamic effect. The do is soft. The wah is loud. It is not a pitch bending effect. I do not go da da wah. What's making the wah? The fact that I'm thrusting, I'm suddenly changing my dynamic really dramatically. The sudden dynamic change will cause a little pitch aberration to happen there. I don't have to do it. So my jaw is going to go back, forth, not back, down, forth, and up. I'm not loosening and tightening. I'm just going back and forth. I'm not going. If you add a pitch bend to this effect, you will get what I call high school scooping, or if I'm talking to high school kids, then it's junior high school scooping. You don't want that sound. It's just an immature sound. It's not how real players do it. So all the doo-wahs are dynamic effects. However, the third doo-wah, the same note, is a little bit of a pitch effect. We actually tend to do a little more of a dip. All right, ghosted notes. The ghosted note is simply the lowest note of a contour. In the articulation chapter, we talked about how the highest note of contours are accented. The lowest note of contours are ghosted. And all that simply means is kind of the opposite of accented. They're just softer than the notes around them. So if I have, that second note is ghosted. I'm actually doing that with my tongue, with the half tongue. My tongue's just on the note enough that it's smothering it a little bit, it's muffling it. So I'm blowing just as hard the whole time. I'm blowing the same, the entire figure. But I'm putting my tongue, the end tongue, on the ghosted note. That lowest note needs to be ghosted so that the top notes are smacked. Here's a little bit of an example from a Count Basie line. So I've got the bottom notes that are ghosted. Let me do this in slow motion. You can hear it. I had two kids come in the same afternoon from the same high school. Band director had passed out. Next goes A Warm Breeze, has ghosted notes written in. They can be written as X heads, or they can be written as parentheses around a note head, or they can be X heads with parentheses around them. And sometimes they're not even written. But that lowest note of the contour tends to be a ghosted note. And they were going. I said, wait a minute. What about those other notes that are written there, those low notes? Oh, those are ghosted notes. Yeah? Our band director told us not to play those. Oh, I wonder why they're written there. I'm here to tell you that ghosted notes still have an apparition. They don't disappear. They're not gone. They're not annihilated. They're fingered. They have tone. They are articulated with the end tongue. They're just softer. That's all. So that's how I would do ghosted notes. And I usually, you could do it with the jaw too. You go, I went too far. Let me exaggerating it too much. But you pull the jaw back a little bit, it's going to mute the note just like we did in the Duwa. So it could be done with the jaw, and you see people do it that way. I think it's more efficient to do it with the end tongue, the half tongue. Instead of the real sound. I've got my tongue half on the reed really lightly. We talk about the end tongue a little bit in the basics chapter, and also a little bit about the end tongue in the articulation chapter. I've got a blue note here too, by the way, so I'm bending it. All right, so that's ghosted notes. A flip, 2 notes with an up and a down written in here. It's kind of like a doit and a fall combined. So I'm going up, I'm written on an A, I'm going up to a D, then I'm coming down to the written note E. And again, I'm kind of smearing things in the same manner with my oral cavity. By the way, long notes are sforzando, crescendo. Even if they're not written, that tends to be always the case. I wrote it on this example. So I'm putting that in there too. Well, that would be a flip. I finally did the rhythm that I wrote. Okay, the plop. This is like a upside down fall. Yeah. I'm going to start off in an octave higher. That was an octave. I didn't perform it very well. I'm going to start higher than the note and crescendo the plop into it. It's like an A down to the D. Or I could do a D. If I want a bigger effect, I'm going to go wider. That's a plop. Biop, biop. So it involves a crescendo. Again, fingers in the path of least resistance. And then punch that bottom note. All right. The Hodges scoop. The Hodges scoop is a little unique because he doesn't just go where he fingers it up. Instead, let's say I'm fingering that to a high C sharp. Is that what I played? I guess I played a D. Let's play a C. We'll go to there. I'm going to finger a D. Those are the notes I'm fingering. The minute I'm going to push hard, I'm going to really pound the air, and the moment I hit, the fingers immediately all come off. At the same time, I do a little bit of a bend. And then I add vibrato on the note when I've arrived at pitch. This is, Johnny Hodges made this sound famous. If you're imitating that style period, or anything Ellington-ish, you need to be able to do that if you're doing, for example, a Hodges ballad. That's an important effect. So that's how it's done. Fingers come off, all of them at the same time, not gradually like in a fall. Subtone, yes. So subtone. We've talked about this a couple of other places, but I'll mention it here. Sometimes it's actually written in. Let's say the saxophone section has a line that's unison and it's low. I do subtone by pulling my jaw back. If I keep the same pressure, I'd probably choke the reed a little too much. So when I pull the jaw back, I also slightly loosen. And that way I can get that more air in the tone and get that subtone. Real tone, subtone. Sometimes it's actually notated over the note subtone, and the whole saxophone section tries to do subtone. Sometimes there are notes written in the higher register that don't really subtone properly. So you just have to do the best you can. Let's talk about the jazz turn. We talked about the classical turn in our classical ornamentation video, where the classical turn goes up a note, back, down a note, back. There's four additional notes. But in the jazz turn, there's only 2 additional notes. We only go up and back. We don't go to the down part. So just going up and back. It can be written with the regular turn symbol that we have in our classical music. It can also be written, and you have to see the books to see this, but it can also be written as a 16th note triplet with an 8th note, which is not what we play. You have to play the note long. So I always reduce this to the basic pitches. Of course, it's all slurred. I've written that different ways in the book where you can kind of see how I think I'd write it the way we really do it, and then how it's usually written when you have to interpret it. But that's what the jazz turn is like. Let's do one more. Let's do the shake. This is a fun one. The shake is really a brass phenomenon. They do it as a lip trill, kind of. They're going between 2 different notes. We have some of these we can do on the saxophone. By using sort of multiphonic type fingerings, we can maybe use our mouth to go between 2 pitches, like a brass player. Here's an example of that. So I'm actually doing the shake with my mouth. I can't do that on every note. Well, Don Menza can, I think, but I've never figured out every note. I saw him do that one time. He had figured it out for just about every note. Amazing. But what if I have this? So a shake, by the way, is wider. A trill is usually a second, either half step or whole step. A shake is usually a minor third or a major third, depending on how it fits in the fingers and the key and so on. I would normally go for the minor third unless it just isn't practical. So here I've got a shake written on an F. I'm going to shake to A flat. So if I just finger this, it doesn't really sound like that other effect. So I'm going to try to make it sound more like that so it matches the brass shake. And I'm going to do that by kind of mishmashing my embouchure around while I'm doing that fingering, and not in any particular rhythmic way. So I've got my embouchure messing around. I've also probably done some stuff in my oral cavity. When you get that flexibility build up, it kind of helps with things like that too. Sounds close. We don't want the clean sound. We want it dirtier sound to match the brass. So that's how I would go after the shakes. Sometimes shakes are written on really odd intervals, and you just do the best you can. When you match it with the whole rest of the band and all the brass shaking too, it'll be fine. Sometimes we can't get a shake that sounds that good with some intervals we have to do. By the way, shakes are not as fast as trills. Shakes are not measured, just like trills aren't usually measured. But you could probably take it as a general principle that shakes approximate the speed of triplets in the piece that you're doing. However, you don't try to do that really carefully, and you don't want it to be synchronized through the ensemble. You don't want to be in sync with the rest of the band. Let's do another jazz effect. This is the growl. And this is often not indicated. A lot of times a performer will just add this on its own. But it can also be indicated just by writing growl over the note. But let's say I want to do something like this. How do I get that growl? I'm actually humming in my throat while I'm playing. I'm not usually humming at the same pitch I'm playing. listen close, you can hear my throat's vibrating. I'm just getting that growl by humming. A lot of people have difficulty doing that. It's mostly because the throat's tight. If the throat can be relaxed, then it can vibrate. It'll let it loose and let it vibrate while I'm actually playing. So there's one more jazz effect. I think that's probably good enough to kind of illustrate a lot of these jazz effects. If they're new to you, this might be helpful so you can kind of play with them. I know back in high school, I wanted to be the guy that could do all these things better than anybody on the block. And I remember spending hours practicing. And get the Deutsch going. Now I'd do glisses, I go like, and then I go a wider interval, practice up and down the horn. You can actually make a little exercises for yourself to get acquainted with how to do these, but I think that's kind of an introduction at least to the way these are done and the sound that they should make when you get them right. So good luck with that. Let's go on.